just to let you know that. Speaking of which, Scott Peterson wrote something that I put that over there. Scott Peterson. I generally have something to read to you by Scott Peterson. This is titled Barefoot and Pregnant. And I don't have it from the Anderson Valley Advertiser. I have it from Scott Peterson himself. He wrote to me something about a conversation he had with Bruce over at the AVA, who found fault with it, and I didn't really understand what the problem was, but I have it here, and I'm just going to read it to you. Scott Peterson wrote, Barefoot and Pregnant. Lily Ledbetter worked as a supervisor at the Goodyear Tire Factory down yonder in Gadsden, Alabama, from the day she was hired in 1979 until her retirement in 1998. Miss Ledbetter was paid less than her male counterparts. So she sued the bastards and lost. Her case made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where it was finally tossed out because she hadn't complained right off the bat. And I remember reading about that to you, closer to when it was in court, actually, the Supreme Court. She hadn't complained right off the bat because she did not know. By the time she found out, it was too late to complain, they say. And so that was the technicality that they threw her out based on. I'm sorry, I'll just continue reading. But in 2009, Congress passed a law in her name. It was called the Lily Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. The upshot of that legislation extended the statute of limitations for discriminatory actions like Ms. Ledbetter. So instead of having to sue an employer 6 months after their first paycheck, women can do that 6 months after their last paycheck, giving pause for many to reflect on how women were treated in the workplace, except for a toxic gender traitor by the name of Phyllis Schlafly. Schlafly wasn't just a conservative. She was a $20 whore for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who absolutely hated the Ledbetter Act. And why not? USCOC is, and was at the time, a nonprofit led by a greedy prick named Thomas J. Donahue, who got paid $4.9 million a year for doing it, on the backs of female counterparts earning 100 times less for the exact same job. So Donahue and Schlafly pushed back, and they pushed back hard. But just like Ms. Ledbetter, they lost, ultimately. So did Ms. Schlafly. When she finally fucking died, her obituary was done up brown by San Francisco Chronicle writer Kaylee Milner in September of 2016, who rightfully opined, "It's one thing to believe that women should stay barefoot and pregnant, and that evil interests are conspiring to do away with the traditional America of one's imagination. It's clear from their votes and their YouTube comments that many Americans still persist in this kind of magical thinking. But Schlafly was different. She didn't just believe that certain groups of people should have fewer rights. She dedicated her life to fighting for that outcome. Historically, someone like me, African-American woman, has always borne the brunt of these people's work." Mendocino County isn't home to many African Americans, but it certainly is to women, some of whom arrive here as Phyllis Schlaflys in their own right, to throw all of their sisters under the bus by working for less, protesting less, and doing it all on their knees, like Sharon Davis does at the Mendocino Coast Chamber of Commerce. Looking at Ms. Davis' past, the phrase gender traitor comes to mind. That's obvious in her LinkedIn resume, where she lists herself as the owner of a dead website called toworkathome.com, thinking that nobody can see what she did there. But au contraire, everybody can today, through the magic of something called the Wayback Machine. Like snake oil, her website targeted the vulnerable. Predominantly, they were stay-at-home mothers looking for work, with tantalizing clickbait like, "Hello, $60,000 per month" ads that steer female suckers into multi-level marketing schemes, or worse, to a so-called employer named Lionbridge. On NASDAQ, Lionbridge looks legit, but not on sites like Glassdoor, where it's called a waste of time by one employee, who put in 20 hours of work for every 1 hour of pay. Whenever Lionbridge got around to it. Or others who actually paid to be employed there, and on Ripoff Report, where it's called dishonest, deceptive, and unfair to people they hire. And according to Ms. Davis' own website, 80% of them were women. The spider in that web was a man named Dennis Seifert, who's owned hundreds of such websites, all of which seem to be one-way MLM funnels targeting stay-at-home moms. That's just like Venus flytraps somehow convert hapless job hunters into money. In this case, for Mr. Seifert, I asked Ms. Davis if any females had ever earned $60,000 a month in reportable income, but I never got a response. So I asked Mr. Seifert if any males had ever earned that amount. Crickets. Seifert never returned any of my calls or emails, which is odd for a company called Responsive Data. So I left him one final email. Could he identify anyone who'd actually earned $60,000 per month, or did he ever have a job like that? For a stay-at-home mom? I never got a response. Putting the ball back into Ms. Davis' court, on her resume, she claims to have helped countless stay-at-home moms to find employment, which is certainly true in a sense because she couldn't give me the names of any who'd actually profited from her assistance. The only response to my inquiries came from John Anderson, Ms. Davis' next employer. He's chairman of the recently deceased Jerry Mello Foundation in Fort Bragg. Davis was the executive director there for a spell, but seems to have had trouble keeping up with JMF's paperwork. Any of it. By the time Davis was gone in 2016, the IRS had revoked JMF's nonprofit status, ditto for the state of California, which seems to be fine for Anderson, who runs the Forest Policy Department for Mendocino Redwood Company, the outfit that's been poisoning local forests with hack and squirt herbicides for years, as opposed to the Jerry Mello Foundation, whose mission was to protect local forests from poisoning. My question for Mr. Anderson would be simple. How could he serve two masters? One, a for-profit hell-bent on poisoning local forests, and two, a non-profit dedicated to protecting them from it. And then for the kicker, what did keep MRC, that's Mendocino Redwood Company, from treating unwanted foundations like it handled unwanted trees? What about poisoning them with, say, toxic management? Anderson, like all politicians, is a pleasant man. He had nothing bad to say about Sharon Davis or the Jerry Mello Foundation. JMF's sole purpose was dealing with trespass marijuana grows, at least according to Anderson in a brief telephone interview. In fact, those were just about the first words out of his mouth. Yet JMF's articles of incorporation say nothing about that. Quote, "The specific purpose of this corporation is to educate the community about the need for safety and environmental health in our forest lands and open space on public and private property," is the precise language there which makes JMF a four-letter word to Anderson's paymaster. My opener was a simple question. Did Anderson know that JMF's nonprofit status had been revoked 8 months ago? He said no, but the poker player in me didn't buy it. There was no passion in his voice. Nor was there any disbelief. Anderson responded without much surprise, suggesting to me he knew darned well what had happened. When I asked how a tan oak dies from hack and squirt, Anderson went into lurid detail about how the poison was applied in just 3 or 4 drops, yet not what actually killed the tree. After being gently cornered, he finally admitted that the tree slowly suffocates. Nice. So I got out my own hack and squirt for Mr. Anderson, a series of written questions applied in just 3 or 4 drops. There was no deadline for the answers. I wanted to give him plenty of time to reach MRC's roots and maybe suck all the air out of its boardroom. The first drop confronted Anderson with JMF's Articles of Incorporation, clearly identifying it as an environmental advocate, in contrast with MRC's controversial and massive use of hack and squirt poison. Wasn't that serving two masters? The second drop cut to the chase. Who was responsible for the 5 years of IRS paperwork that never got filed? What were they paid for doing or not doing it? And who set the pay, giving him a chance to either hand Ms. Davis over or fall on his own sword? The third drop took him to Ms. Davis's resume and then to her dried-up website showing how she could supposedly raise $60,000 a month. How much did she actually raise for the Jerry Mello Foundation? My fourth and final drop was a doozy. Since MRC poisons unwanted trees, what did keep them from poisoning unwanted environmental advocates like JMF? And why not do that with toxic management, who might just forget to file all the right paperwork while remembering to hire all the wrong people? The hack and squirt poison is something called imazapyr. In 2002, 5,400 pounds of it was reportedly used here, two-thirds of that by Anderson's employer. And since the passage of Measure V last June, MRC hasn't slowed down any. The public should know that chemical is banned in Europe too, but you probably won't be hearing that from the Jerry Mello Foundation, not as long as Anderson and Mendocino Redwood Company are running the place. It takes about a month for imazapyr to kill a healthy tan oak. So I figured it'd take about that long for my hack and squirt to do its job on MRC's publicity-declared mission to be good stewards of the forest land. During my chat with Anderson, I said I'd be comparing JMF to the Community Foundation of Mendocino County, which, oddly enough, is also chaired by a registered professional forester. That's Jim Little, who Anderson claims to know, but Mr. Little's administrator, also a female, is paid like a man at a salary of $100,000 plus benefits, while JMF's female administrator works for nothing. Mr. Little somehow manages to file all of his paperwork on time, something that Anderson has never done at JMF. And Mr. Little's organization raised nearly $10 million last year, while Mr. Anderson appears to have taken in just over $7,000 for JMF over its entire history. A few minutes later, Anderson shot me an email claiming that the IRS revocation status I'd sent him wasn't current. So I checked with the IRS again to find that JMF is still just as dead as a doornail. I also checked with the State Registry of Charitable Trusts, where Anderson's operation is reported there today as being delinquent, suggesting that Mr. Anderson can neither read nor tell time. So I went to find his online resume at LinkedIn.com. Oddly enough, public access is blocked, but he's clearly identified there as the Director of Forest Policy at MRC and has been for 17-plus years, which is really weird for somebody who doesn't seem to understand a simple IRS revocation notice. The IRS takes a dim view of shenanigans like this, especially in light of JMF bylaws that specifically prohibit conflicts of interest, and particularly since they were filed with the IRS by John Anderson himself. According to IRS rules, any back taxes and penalties can't be paid out of charitable assets, but must come from individuals, putting both Anderson and MRC in a very difficult position, but not Sharon Davis, who's now totally off the hook. Halfway through writing this article, something weird happened. Sharon's LinkedIn resume, once public, suddenly became private. That's okay, because I'd already downloaded a copy just in case that happened. Now her amazing resume can be seen by everyone with an internet connection forever. And in the article, that's a link. On the page, it's just a word. Maybe I'll go look at that later. After the monkey wrenching was finished at Jerry Mello Foundation, Davis finally came to Jesus, the Mendocino Coast Chamber of Commerce, an apostle of the Messiah that had fought the Lilly Ledbetter Act tooth and nail. And since the statutory 6-month limit had passed, she has no standing to sue JMF over lost wages, but their current executive director does. That's Anna Borsich, who's got no problem sharing her LinkedIn resume. And since JMF's nonprofit status has been revoked since May of 2016, she might just be able to reach into John Anderson's and MRC's pockets for any shortfall, just as long as she gets a paycheck. And thanks to Lilly Ledbetter, the lower the better. Before publishing this article, I ran it by all of my sources with a friendly email to John Anderson, Anna Borsich, Sharon Davis, Kaylee Milner, and Dennis Seifert, including a sincere offer to address any corrections they might have to suggest. And that's an article by Scott M. Peterson titled Barefoot and Pregnant.